Thank you very much. Now, I am a futurologist, so I know exactly what the first question is in your minds. It's coming through psychically. I can't even see any of you, and it's coming through. Now, I'm getting, what's a futurologist? That is a very good question. I will hopefully try and answer that one. I'm getting, do I know the lottery numbers? I'm getting, do I have a crystal ball? Now, actually, I do have a crystal ball. It doesn't work, unfortunately, so I do have to work slightly harder for my living than reading tea leaves or looking at crystal balls. Hence, I don't know the lottery numbers, I'm afraid. If I did, I would be sipping champagne on a yacht in the Caribbean. I'm not, frankly. I am here, which is lovely, actually. Thank you very much for inviting me. Now, what's a futurologist? I guess, actually, I always say that my job title, I feel a little guilty about it because in actual fact, I think most people picture futurologists as thinking maybe 20, 25 years out into the future about intelligent yogurt taking over the world. Watch the yogurt, by the way, it's very dangerous, possibly. I'm not that kind of futurologist, so I'm not thinking about yogurt all the time, unless I'm hungry. To be honest, I don't really think that far out. I always say my future is somewhere around 3 weeks to possibly about 5 years. Now, the reason for that is, of course, I work for BT, so I'm an industrial futurologist. So I always say we work in the same cycles as CEOs do. So actually, frankly, beyond 6 months sometimes is a bit of a struggle for a lot of CEOs. So my time frame's relatively short. So we have had a long discussion on Twitter as to whether I should change my job title. So maybe I should be a nowologist or a soonologist. And actually, I was at Cheltenham Literature Festival earlier in the week, and one of the audience came up with a really interesting one, a soonsayer. I think that's quite nice. I might become a soonsayer very soon. You never know. So in actual fact, my future is relatively short term. I think also the other assumption about futurologists, especially futurologists who work for BT, are going to be technologists. Now, I am in a technology company, it is true. It's probably somewhere in my contract that I have to be somewhat interested in technology. However, I'm a psychologist by background. I got my first degree from Bournemouth University. I got my PhD from Lancaster University. Hopefully there may be somebody out in the audience from one or two of those institutions. So I'm a psychologist by background, and my work really is around how technology changes behaviours and the pressures on those behaviour changes on strategy, on the way that we work and the way that we play. Hence today, what I'm going to talk about is what I call clouds, crowds and customers, which are various bits and pieces of research that we've been doing in BT about some of the consequences of these behaviours. Now, I always say, actually, I don't do my work alone, and I owe an awful lot of debt to many academic institutions around the world because I'm very lucky in BT that we get to work with some of the finest brains in the universe. I'm based just outside Ipswich in the east of England. I am basically at a place called Adastral Park, which is our main R&D centre. It's in the middle of a cow field, as you do. And so we've got lots and lots of people inventing the future. Most of them are technologists, so I work with them very, very closely. But equally, we have strategic partnerships with the likes of Massachusetts Institute of Technology over in Boston. We've got our own lab there. They're the real futurologists. If I want my mind blown, frankly, that is where I go. I'm also working very closely with Cambridge University at the moment on a couple of projects. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that we're also doing with London Business School at the moment on a little project called The Future of Work, which frankly is quite a broad topic. And I always say, actually, when I talk about the future of work, and the consortium we are members of is actually run by a lovely lady called Linda Grattan at London Business School. It's a consortium of about 40 global companies, and we get together quite regularly to talk about all sorts of stuff about the future of work. And inevitably, the future of education always comes up because the two are somewhat interlinked. So I keep saying a lot of the behaviours that we're seeing develop into the future of work need to be developed in the education system. So working with people like Linda give me an awful lot of ideas in terms of the trends that we're seeing in terms of the behaviour changes and what we need to do about them. So clouds, crowds and customers are 3 trends that I'm going to very briefly talk about today. The first one I'm going to talk about is customers, because frankly we all need to start with the customer, and I always say that's one very big change in the university system at the moment, is that your students are now paying quite a lot of money to do business with you, to get their education. Therefore, the relationship has subtly changed into that of a consumer relationship. Now, it's quite interesting that consumers, the way that we're behaving as consumers now is quite weird. I mean, frankly, I am talking about all of us, because technology has changed our relationship with consumption. It's changed the way we shop, for example. We're getting some really strange behaviours in terms of shopping. So the fact that we are showrooming now, as the retailers call it, that we're in a physical shop and a virtual space at the same time, comparing prices, looking for a bargain. And certainly that's some of the behaviours that we're seeing due to the transparency of the system. The way that we're shopping, the way that we're consuming is very different. So how does that translate to some of the trends that we're seeing emerge into the university and education space? Well, the consumer relationship is quite an interesting one. It's one I've studied for quite a long time. And we're seeing a number of very interesting trends that we bring to the table as consumers and pressures that we put on organisations serving us. So the first trend we find is that I like to sum it up as, why can't everyone be as easy as Amazon to do business with? So it's certainly one of the interesting things around particularly online retailers is that they're setting the bar for a lot of things in terms of innovation, in terms of service delivery, and very critically in terms of this effort, easy piece. Now, we hear a lot about customer satisfaction, student satisfaction. Satisfaction is really important, but however, we've been talking for years about things like wowing the customer. What we've learned over the years is that wow doesn't necessarily make people satisfied. The basics often make people satisfied. So we're getting a lot of feedback in the consumer surveys that we do in BT, which are global, saying actually one of the critical things that customers look for is easy, a reduction of efforts in doing the things that they don't really want to do, the things that they don't necessarily value, like getting accommodation, getting online, all of those things. And especially since you're dealing with a particularly generally a younger generation who are very impatient as well as wanting reduced effort, we've got really interesting things going on. Effort is one of those things that I've been looking at a lot over the past 3 years, because it's coming out as very, very strong in terms of a driver of value. So if we're finding an institution difficult to deal with, only 5% of us think that we're getting value for money. So it's becoming a value for money driver effort. But what is it? Now, I always ask audiences, who's an easy customer to do business with? Amazon always comes up. So I always say, can we start to think like Amazon in this space? Can we be as easy as Amazon to do business with? But to do that, we need to understand what easy is, and we need to also start to measure easy, because what gets measured gets done. So a lot of the stuff that we've been looking at is really trying to unpick what is easy. And what we find is a number of components. So the first one is things like cognitive easiness, cognitive efforts. In other words, how much brain power do I actually have to apply to understand this website, to navigate through this complex IVR system, press 1, press 2, to find the person I need to solve my problem? So that's a lot to do with simplifying stuff, making stuff easier to find on the website, simplifying contact points. So that's cognitive efforts. Then we've got physical efforts. In other words, how much do I have to drag stuff around, carry stuff, actually physically go somewhere to get this thing? So that's all about physical energy and effort. Then there's emotional efforts. We've all been there. How much frustration or anger or joy is generated during this interaction? And then there's the one that everyone kind of recognizes, the most obvious part of effort, which is time. How much time is it going to take me to stand in this queue, sit on hold, get the service I need? And as I said, your generation, particularly the younger generation, under 24s, have no patience. So they need their time really cut down in terms of how they look at service. So effort's quite an interesting piece to look at. And actually, we've been starting to look at how do you measure that as well. So we came up with something called Net Easy in BT, which is really just asking people questions around how easy did you find it to do business with us? Just like you would ask, how satisfied are you? And you mark them on a 1 to 10 scale. You net that, so you either come out as positive or negative. Hopefully, if you're positive, you're easy to do business. If you're negative, you're difficult. And if you are difficult, the likelihood is students will not perceive that they are getting value for money. So it's one of those really, really interesting things to start to measure and manage. The other thing about customers is that they are, we call it omni-channel at the moment. So largely we call them autonomous customers, because frequently people start online to solve their problems. So Google is kind of our mediator for advice seeking now. So we'll go onto a search engine, we'll seek advice on a search engine. If we can't find that, we look at other channels. So we go, I'm going to have to call them, or I'm going to have to go into the front office. I'm going to have to see them, I'm going to have to email them. Oh, and by the way, email, that's a really interesting one. Ask an average 14-year-old about email at the moment. They will roll their eyes and go, that is so last year. Why would you want to use email? So email, certainly some futurologists, is a channel that we think may eventually die. So we've got to consider that kind of thing. How do we manage people that are skipping around channels? Because as customers, we're goal-directed. We go to the channel what we think is going to get us to our goal, and if it doesn't, we move to another one. And the challenge, again, for efforts, for easy, for serving this kind of customer, is how on earth do we link these channels together? How do we stop people having to keep repeating themselves every time they change a channel? So omni-channel is one of the really, really interesting questions. It's a dilemma we've had for a long time, but it is being exacerbated by those lovely little devices that are always on and always on us. In other words, the smartphone. And certainly their tablet increasingly is becoming one of those devices as well. Because what we find with those devices is that they make our behaviour really interesting. It turns us into monsters. It turns us into people that are showrooming. It turns us into people that when we're talking to somebody maybe in the customer service desk, we're Googling at the same time. We will then wave our smartphone or our tablet at that poor person and go, that's not what it says on their website. We've got customers that are using apps, that are using the websites, that are ringing us and are in physical spaces. And the dilemma there from a customer experience perspective is how on earth do we tie all those channels together? So if the app contradicts the website, contradicts the front desk, contradicts the phone call, that is very confusing, that is not easy, that is complex. So that's one huge challenge that we have with an increasingly connected, autonomous, savvy customer. So that's customers. That's just one thing that we need to think about. The next thing we need to think about is crowds. So this is kind of linked to that customer behavior. Let's take it further. So I'm not just talking about social media here, I'm talking about collaboration and how collaboration is changing because of the technologies that we are using. Interestingly enough, I always say that when I was at school, which was a very, very, very long time ago, collaboration was called cheating. Now, the education system seemed to change at around the age of 35. So anyone under 35, collaboration becomes very much part of the education process, not called cheating anymore. So in actual fact, when we look at collaboration, and particularly when we look at the behaviours of the under 24s, and to a certain extent the under 35s, they've been conditioned to share a lot more, to collaborate a lot more, to put their knowledge out there and get people to use their knowledge. If we're over 35, we still think sharing is cheating. We think knowledge is power. Sometimes we do not share as much as we should. So therein lies a dilemma, because the technologies now are allowing us to become incredibly sharing, possibly too. We share maybe too much. Certainly some of the under 24s are going to regret some of the stuff they have shared to the world in the future, probably. That's one future prediction I can make. So collaboration can be quite an interesting challenge. And the other interesting challenge is, of course, we're not just talking in education about younger generations. Actually, one of the most fascinating things about the future of work, especially, is that by 2020, we are typically going to have 5 generations at work. It's the first time that has happened, mainly because traditionalists who would have traditionally retired cannot now afford to. So they're still in the workforce, as are the baby boomers. Now, they are generally the decision makers. We are a product of the technology that we have evolved with. So certainly traditionalists and baby boomers love things like email. It's very familiar to them. It's the way that they collaborate. In fact, sometimes they come in and they email the person sitting opposite them rather than talk to them. So there's some fascinating behaviours going on with the older population, not just the younger population. But of course, ask those key decision makers over 50s about social media. They will think it is a complete and utter waste of time and largely is about people posting photos lying in their own vomit. So they won't see the value of it. And yet, when we ask an under 35, typically they don't see the value of email. They do see the value of things like chats. They do see the value of things like social networking. It's the principal way they live their lives. So, how do we convince some of those decision makers that those tools that certainly your population are using to a huge degree to collaborate, to learn, and certainly I was at a friend's house, they got some teenagers the other day and they were up in their bedrooms. Of course, I always say the other thing that's changed since I was a girl was that if I was naughty, I used to get sent to my bedroom. Of course, that's not what you do now because that's exactly where they want to be. The ultimate punishment now is disconnection. Take away the mobile phone, take away the internet connection. All their friends think they are dead. Now, that's another challenge around that collaboration piece because, of course, they're sitting in their bedrooms doing their homework, and yet they're on Skype. They've got various video channels and chat channels open. That is a very natural way of doing their homework, and they're bringing that kind of expectation into university spaces. So the big, and indeed someone tweeted me the other day that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has just been updated. Wi-Fi is now a basic thing that they need, over and above food and shelter. So connectivity is absolutely vital for these people to share and to collaborate. And I keep saying, if you want to see the future of education, certainly watch a 14-year-old boy playing World of Warcraft. Because I find it amazing that they're playing a game, but they're talking to people around the world through text, through speech, not necessarily through video, although I suspect they do that in their guilds afterwards. But they're even doing really savvy things. They're outsourcing to China. So whilst they're at school, some poor Chinese person is being paid to play the game so that when they come back out of school into the home, they've got points that they can use to play the game. So there's some really savvy behaviours going on simply by looking at a 14-year-old boy playing a game. They're bringing that kind of expectation into the education space, and they are for sure bringing that expectation into the workspace as well. Which leads us to clouds. Now, everyone in telecoms has to talk about cloud. Frankly, I find cloud a bit tedious. I don't like the technology kind of is irrelevant to me. One of the things I really like about cloud is the fact that it changes behaviours fundamentally. For one thing, it untethers us. There are lots of things that are untethering us now, and certainly one of the things I'm looking at the moment as part of the future of work is the future of physical spaces, the future of workspaces, and how we're starting to use that very differently because our technology is untethering us. Now, partially that's because technology is also changing in the way that, you know, when we used to have a physical desk, an office, because we had big technology, we had lots of paper, we didn't have connectivity, we had to have a fixed phone. All of that is changing. So we're moving from big technology to smaller technology to technology that is really, really portable. We don't need a fixed phone anymore. We can have a smartphone or a soft phone, so we're not tethered anymore. And certainly when we have the Wi-Fi wings to fly into the cloud and access services, as long as we've got connectivity, the world is our oyster. We can literally work anywhere. And choice is one very big thing in terms of the way that we work and the way that we learn. And I think, again, younger generations want choices in terms of how they work, when they work, and where they work. In the future of work stuff, we've been looking at simply the effect of this on the office. So what are physical spaces for now? Actually, the answer is physical spaces are about socialising, about work, about education, about learning. They're places, face-to-face is incredibly valuable. It can't be replaced. There is something unique about face-to-face. And certainly when we interview younger people about the future of education, they still say they want to come to somewhere and see people and talk to people because face-to-face is unique. So physical spaces offer socialising about work rather than necessarily working. Because London Business School points out that during an average working day, we are interrupted once every 3 minutes. Now, I suspect that these hyper-connected children are probably actually looking at being interrupted way more than that because they've got beeps and they've got things going on all the time. They're multitasking to the nth degree. They're task switching to the nth degree. It's exhausting, frankly, and that is a problem. Some of the work we're doing with Cambridge is looking at the effect of technology on our stress levels. Not necessarily good for us. But certainly we've got this situation where we've got people effectively talking all the time in physical spaces and virtual spaces. Actually, if we want to work, one of the things that we do tend to do is to go somewhere else. Now, we might go home, or actually my preference is what I call the coffice, because I only need 4 things to work. So actually, this presentation's got a lot of C's in it. So I need good coffee, good cake, that is not negotiable. I need cake. I need good connectivity. I really do need that. But I also need company. I need a buzz. Hence, I actually am originally from Bath. If I go into one of the Starbucks in Bath, I can find half of Bath University in there actually working. That is their coffice. So we are seeing this incredible flexibility of work styles. And one of the things we need to think about is how on earth does the physical workspace start to evolve? And actually, so that's some of the stuff that's been going on at MIT at the moment, largely because they've moved to a new building. They've had the opportunity to start to rethink their workspace. So they've done things like take out meeting rooms. They're wasted space half the time. They've created these bubble spaces where you can go in and socialize. And they're acoustically shielded. So that you can't overhear the conversation. But they are tiny little spaces where people can come together and socialize. They've created big spaces where people can bump into each other and have those water cooler conversations that are really valuable. They've created a degree of flexibility around food and drink as well. And certainly if you go into workspaces like Google and Facebook, almost entirely their workspaces are done around food and drink because we've always collaborated and worked around food and drink. So, that was just a very brief tour of some of the things that we're seeing in terms of the way that technology is fundamentally changing behaviour. How do we need to think in terms of, firstly, the customer, then the crowds, and then the clouds? How does that enable us to move forward, to change the way fundamentally that we do education? Because a lot of these behaviours are quite challenging, and frankly, if you ban them, people do it anyway. So they are immensely versatile, particularly, again, those under 24s will invent new ways of working, and you need to actually move very fast to try and embrace those rather than say, no, you can't do that. It's the death of Dr. No, I keep saying. So, thank you for listening. That was Clouds and Crowds and Customers. I've been Nicola Millard. Thank you very much.